I'm Nikosar in Washington, D.C., and you're watching Iranistas. 1st of May is a sacred day for workers and laborers all around the world. But in Iran, it has a specific value. Many workers have the chance and opportunity to raise their voices about what's happening to them and to their families and what's happening in their workplaces.
Like every year, Iranian workers of all industries collectively turned up for protests in Iran today. The International Workers' Day, or May Day, is now an annual demonstration where outrage against the Khomeiniist regime is distinct and blatant. Despite the massive turnout at the actual rallies every year, the regime has begun to hold its own version of a rally, and this year was no exception. As Rouhani delivered his speech at Khomeini's grave, workers who had gained access to the venue began chanting slogans such as, "It's a grieving day today. A worker's life is doomed today." The superintendent of the event called the workers opportunists and physically threatened them. Meanwhile, large groups of workers protested in front of the regime's parliament. Some carried banners that commemorated the International Workers' Day, and others carried large photos of imprisoned labor activists and various political prisoners, chanting their names and demanding their immediate and unconditional release. Security forces attacked the workers and attempted to quash the protest by confiscating cell phones, preventing demonstrators from taking photos and videos. A resolution was also read at each of the protests throughout the country that called for an immediate increase in minimum wage based on a basket of fees in accordance with the standards of modern life, an end to making trade and civil protests a security issue, a ban on security charges and prosecution of union, political, and civil rights activists, abolishing the death penalty and all other barbaric forms of punishment, such as flogging, overturning prison sentences against labor activists, teachers, and jailed social and civil rights activists, unconditional release of all trade unionists, teachers, and imprisoned social and political activists, unconditional freedom of creating independent organizations, strikes, protests, and marches, immediate payment of outstanding claims of workers, retirees, teachers, job security for workers, prohibition of child labor, and finally, eradication of all discriminatory laws against women and the full and unconditional equality of women and men in all areas. In 2016, in cities throughout Iran, Iranian workers organized and participated in more than 2,000 protests. Undeterred, workers continue to confront the government's years-on-end hostile measures toward labor groups that organize and workers who participate in the rallies. Protests have become more widespread and protracted, some with the participation of as many as 2,000 demonstrators at individual rallies. Workers from every industry, from aluminium to vegetable oil, agribusiness, home appliances, miners, textile, auto workers, and much more, participate in strikes and protests. Many go unpaid and are owed in arrears salary that are said to go as far back as 22 months. Dangerous working conditions, a lack of workmen's compensation or insurance, and job security are among the many issues Iranian workers face. Given that most companies have been privatized and placed under the control of the Revolutionary Guards, or their owners are under obligation to them and the regime brass, labor protests always have an overtly political message. The Khomeiniist regime has destroyed all independent labor organizations and replaced them with their own governmental workers' house or Islamic councils, which exist to suppress protests and stifle any dissent or hint at workers' demands.
In May 19, the Iranian Islamic regime is putting on one of his shows that they call election, and Iranian people call selection. Voting without freedom, without equal rights, without prosperity, without the respect for the will of the people is not representative of the people. The reason democracy in the Western world has become famous for the symbol of freedom and equal rights is because it includes freedom and equal rights for everybody. The election in Iran is not the election of good people. It's not the election of the people who care about the people of Iran. It's not for embetterment of Iranian life, the children education. It's not for the economy. It's not for freedom and equality of women. It is only for members of the aristocracy of Islamic regime who are going to continue the regime's power over the people of Iran, the regime's power in the region, and not caring about the people. The presidents pass a test that they are loyal to the regime, not to the country, not to the people of Iran. When Mr. Rouhani promised a better economy for the people, but nothing has changed. The economy is the same. And Mr. Rouhani has proved the last 4 years that he works for Khamenei and his regime.